Yo, hell yeah. Wyatt begins in like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yo, welcome to Wyatt, and I'm your host, Wyatt O'Brien Evans. Woof, goddammit, woof, 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 woof. Hey, to all my YouTubers out there, if you like what you hear and if you like what you see, just click that subscribe button at the bottom of your screen. I said just click it, click it, click it, click it. I love to click it. Yeah. Well, as y'all know, Wyatt is an oasis for authors. And today's special guest is Mr. Eddie S. Pierce Jr., an author, and he's also a publisher, y'all. His publishing company is Rainbow Room Publishing. And Mr. Pierce Jr. has a captivating and intriguing journey to share with us. So, are you ready? I know I am. So, without further ado, Wyatt welcomes Eddie S. Pierce Jr. He's an author and founder of Rainbow Room Publishing. Talk at me. How the hell are ya?
I'm doing pretty good. And yourself?
I am doing great. You know, it's really good to have you here, Eddie. Wyatt is a very author-friendly podcast, but I really wanted to have you on to get the perspective of a publisher. So thank you for stopping by, Wyatt.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, first of all, I want to talk a little bit about your role as an author because, man, you have written, I believe, 3 books. One is Love Something Infinite, Love from Behind, and then Love Changes. So would you give us like the 25-word elevator pitch on each one of them?
Oh, wow. On each one. Largely, it starts with the first book, which fictionalizes my life. It was an introspective activity that grew into a number of different things. At first, a hobby, then later, and part of my entry into my master's program, Fine Arts and Creative Writing Masters, with Chicago State University, by the way. And then upon having to graduate from that, I needed a creative thesis. So I added to it until it became enough for that thesis, which also became enough for the book. And then from there, the other 2 stories are following characters that are secondary characters in the first 2. So it's largely autobiographical at times, but still fictionalized. And then by the time you honestly get to the second book, it's taken on a world and a universe of its own. So yeah, that's what some people have been terming the Love series, the 3 books collectively.
The LUV Love series. I like that. Okay, now a little bit later, we're going to fully explore your journey as an author and also as well your genesis for creating Rainbow Room Publishing. But for right now, let's sashay through the corridors of time so that our audience can learn all about your backstory, because we here at Wyatt are nosy like that.
All
So,
right.
where were you born and raised?
Born and raised Chicago, Illinois. I love to
Okay.
say by way of Jackson, Mississippi area. That's where my people come from. That's largely where the head comes from. But yeah, Chicago, Illinois.
Okay, great. What's your family structure like? Do you have brothers, sisters?
Pretty extended family. For anybody familiar with some of the family structures, even in biblical times, it's a gang of us, to say the least. But mother, father, stepmother, stepfather, siblings from all of those, making me the oldest, I believe, of 8. A
Oh,
host of nieces and
whoa.
nephews, a host of cousins, good handful of aunts, uncles, and the whole thing. So always been
Mhm.
surrounded by a lot of family.
Great, great. Okay, now, Eddie, here's the question that I love to ask my guest. Here it is. What was Eddie like as a boy, a little nipper? Give us like 3 characteristics, qualities, attributes that best describe you?
Um, Quiet and introverted. So I guess that's two.
No, come on.
Oh, very. And
Okay.
I learned over time the term social introvert. So it's like the person that when stuff like this happens, the personality turns on. Boom. The camera's on. You don't want to look a fool. You better say something. Get the folks a show they watching. Um, but that person that was quiet, but when the occasion arise,
Mhm.
that was even me as a child. I would say very imaginative, definitely.
Mhm.
Even to think about the way that I used to tell stories to myself back then. Yeah, I would use the weirdest of media. In a performance I did not too long ago, I talked about how instead of having like using Legos and things, I actually had buttons and things of that nature that I would play with on the hardwood floor. The hardwood floor, if you can imagine, was the film reel,
Mhm.
and the buttons were the characters that were moving around. And it wasn't because we were so poor and didn't have all these toys. I had the Thundercats lair and all kinds of other craziness, but that was how I started to tell stories until I turned later on to put it on pen and paper. So imaginative and talkative when I want to be. I guess that's the best way to wrap up.
Well, you did a hell of a good job wrapping up. Thank you for that. All right. Well, let's fast forward. Now, you earned a Master's of Fine Arts in creative writing from Chicago State University, right?
Yes.
How did that experience shape you into the person that you are today?
Oh, well, perhaps the most significant thing being that it's where, in a lot of respects, I learned that I know how to write,
Right.
but I can always learn to do it better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the very practical side of me, that's probably should have been the third word for the last question, but the very practical side of me was, when I was entering into the program, I needed 20 pages of, no, I needed 40 pages of fiction. I had
Oh,
about 20
okay.
from just a plane ride one day when I was bored going for an interview. But they said they needed 40, so I said I'll add 20 more. Boom, I got 40. I get into the program. Then when I need to graduate, I need 100 pages. So I said, well, rather than starting all over, we're just going to add the other 60 so many
Mm-hmm.
pages.
Smart.
And that all comes together in a way that because I was writing about myself, but fictionalizing it, putting it at a safe distance where I could actually analyze my life,
Ah, right, right.
um, I it gave me so much. It gave me a lot as the once conflicted black, gay, Christian boy that later on found out that he was HIV positive and all these different things that would cause a lot of different emotional conflict, if you can imagine. And so, exploring that in my writing, something that I was getting a grade and a degree for.
Right.
I looked later on after, you had to reread that over and over again to edit it, and I saw how much it helped me. Decided that, hey, I've always kind of dreamt about getting published. I know now how to do it self-publishing wise, and maybe this will help someone else. The story turns later into, okay, you did a book and now you need a company.
Okay, I want to stop you right there because much of what you've said is a perfect segue into where I want to go now is that um, you discovered that you were HIV positive and then you were diagnosed with clinical depression. Can you talk to us about that? In which ways did the depression manifest itself? I mean, I have had several bouts of chronic depression
Mhm.
through my life, and a strong advocate for therapy. So,
Yes.
what route did you take, Reggie, and how did you handle
Oh,
it?
Eddie. Yeah.
Eddie, I'm so
Uh,
sorry.
no problem.
Bam.
Ironically, one of my closest brothers, his name is Reggie. So you were close. You were very close. Closer than you
I'm
knew.
sorry. I'm sorry.
But for me, initially it was, I would say, recognized because of all those conflicts I talked about beforehand, as far as being gay, being Christian, a lot of internal self-loathing, not so much even what people would say to me, but what I would often hear. and
Right.
then interpret in my own way, which turned into a lot of depression, which turned into an actual suicide attempt, one of three,
Oh no.
when I was a sophomore in college. And we go through all of that. There's a lot of rebirth, renewal, repurposing, that sort of thing. And I can be slow to learn in some respects. And
Mhm.
so I didn't have the best coping mechanisms about, I don't know, 10 or so years later when there was a second attempt.
Mhm.
The second attempt um, resulted in real therapy this time around. The first time it was more observation. It was like 3 days in a psych ward kind of thing.
Right.
Oh, he
Right.
seems good. He seems well adjusted. I literally got on a train and went back to college 3 days later. Longer story. But that second time I did do outpatient therapy, and some of the outpatient therapy actually was very holistic, and it turned my attention to my writing, and it's
Right.
also kind of coincides with when I was wrapping up some things with the masters, or had finished the masters, and was
Right.
now turning the thesis into the first book. And so it played out in a sense, I love to say, in a lot of respects, coming from a Christian background, as I talked about, we say a lot of churchy things.
Right.
And one of them being that God took a very ugly truth and turned it into a beautiful work of art that has reached a number of people, and became the platform for everything I'm doing almost 12 years later.
Hmm. So, Eddie, you definitely turn the experience, the situation around to a positive, and I have to commend you for that because a lot of people would not have been able to do that.
Thank you.
So, kudos to you. I believe you said that through your writing, you found a safe haven, and you've actually touched on that a bit. Can you drill down deeper for us?
Well, with that, it largely, and this kind of even goes back to childhood. So one thing that you can probably speak to, I'm sure you can, that writers are taught is modeling. The idea that we need to read in order to write effectively. I like to expand the definition to just expose yourself to story, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
in movies, comic books, whatever the case may be. But in all of that, you learn characterization, plot, and all the things I'm teaching in an online class, every so often.
Right.
And while doing all of that, it largely was that the best example I can give, and kind of cute story I like to tell, is that I would read a lot of different mythology, Bible stories, comic books, and I would watch especially a lot of cartoons. That
Mm.
whole filmation get up. So He-Man, She-Ra, the Thundercats, all of those folks. And out of, I guess, boredom sometimes, or just curiosity, when a story would end or an episode would end, if I didn't like the ending, I would write enough of it just to rewrite it so that I could change the ending to what I wanted to change it to. And
Okay.
then that modeling turned into just pulling things out of my imagination. Yeah, knowing that I'm filtering a lot of stuff I took in, but it turned into my own short little stories, childhood writings that I have to this day that, there recently have been some plans germinating about how to put those out.
Yeah. Oh, very interesting. Thank you for that. Um, you describe yourself as a Black Christian HIV positive SGL, same gender loving writer. What challenges do you face with that? Must you reconcile the Christian and the SGL pieces of it? And if so, how do you do it?
Um,
Um,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, no, no. I'd already finished.
Oh, I'm
Please.
sorry. Well, there's definitely something that comes out in the first book, especially the
Mhm.
first book. Um, but it the process for me
Mhm.
has been that, so I grow up in the church and I learn all these spiritual truths and biblical truths and traditions and things for good or for bad, what have you, because there's
Right.
bad theology out there.
Yeah.
And over time, through this fight with depression, this fight with self-acceptance as a gay man, as I like to say in some respects, it's like, okay, and then you add HIV on top of it. Um, I had to look at myself. I had to learn how to love myself, and so much of that, and so much of
Mm,
that came out of my experiences alone with God, my experiences, some yes with other people, but probably the most notable ones being just me and God, sometimes with a pen and a piece of paper, sometimes it's music, just engaging in art. That's, I guess, my worship in a sense.
uh-huh.
So yeah, that is how I kind of reconciled a lot of it. And then of course, there was the piece that, something about seeing it in print. And then of course you're promoting the book, and so that requires you to read it, over and over
Mhm.
again. And so you're reliving a lot of these things. There are pieces that I read to this day that I cannot not cry. And I'm not a fan of crying in public, but that I cannot not cry when I read it. And so that was, I guess, even kind of going back to what I talked about, a safe distance.
Mhm.
Some of that I kind of got off of me by putting it in a book.
Uh-huh. Hmm. Well, I mean, I commend you because so many of us are so, I guess you would say, emotionally constipated that they can't release their what they're really feeling, how they're feeling, and that really will kill you in the end because it's just like eventually you have an explosion inside.
Right.
So yeah, um, you stated that your first book would be nearly impossible to be accepted by traditional publishers, and therefore you decided to form Rainbow Room Publishing. And I definitely understand that. So let's get into that a little bit more.
First of all, thank you for getting the name right. You'd
That,
be
li, li,
surprised, but just thank you. And
I, listen, I've been
and
struggling
it's
with
a
names today.
mouthful.
I don't know what the hell is going
But
on.
you did
I
it. You no,
apologize.
but no, there is nothing to apologize for. I'm commending you, brother. I could show you some old interviews that make me cringe. But anyway, so when I completed the first book, everything for me is kind of an anecdote. But when I completed the first book, I actually went through actually the first two books. I used a self-publishing service, a service where I provided the manuscript. We did some editing together, and there were all these other things that were kind of just fluff in terms of things that they provided that I really didn't need.
Oh.
One of the more significant things kind of for me was, and this is always a teachable moment in my opinion, that they would do the cover for you. But my instant thought, and I think it was a God inspired thought, was I do not want my book on the shelf with a book that looks anywhere similar to it. Because
Mm,
if you all are generating that many covers, there's a chance that
right.
you're using a template or something. And so that turned into a whole photo shoot and everything, and getting, actual models and that sort of thing. But so having done all of that, and upon time to kind of release it and celebrate it, I remember God saying to me, even though you paid them, you orchestrated the whole thing. And that's what a publisher does. They pay for everything, they orchestrate the whole thing, they approve the whole process. You are a
Mm,
publisher, you need a company name.
right.
Fast forward or back, trying to sum it up real quick. Funny story, but it's relevant. That during that whole coming out process, there were different people who found out at different points than others, because I was very vocal about it when I finally did come out. And there were conversations being had, and not in a bad way, but behind my back, where people were feeling certain ways because they found out that, oh, Wyatt knew before such and such knew. I thought I was closer to him than
Oh.
that. And so when I talked to one of my good friends, Yvonne Wimbush, soon to be Carter, one of my best friends, she described it with a great analogy. And she said, well, it's like everybody got an invite to Eddie's Rainbow Room. Somewhere in there, whenever we would have get-togethers at my house, I would kind of phrase it in a funny way and say Eddie's Rainbow Room. But it was this
Uh,
persistent gag. And so she was like, well, everyone got an invite, but they don't realize that there was a group A, a group A, a group B, a group C. Group A came in for the pre-party and moved on to the regular party in a whole nother venue, while group B came in thinking they showed up on time
mm,
and felt privileged, I guess, in a sense, because they got in only to find out that, hey, A got here first. And so it was this long thought process. And so when it came time to say, okay, well, to submit in a sense to God saying I need a company, I was like, well, if I need a company, then I need a company name. And I promise you, it wasn't 5 minutes. There were no other considerations. The name was Rainbow Room Publishing. Done.
Mm, I like that. Definitive, right on point. Okay. Eddie, but let's dissect Rainbow Room Publishing a bit. What's its mission and what do you think its impact has been thus far on publishing, particularly LGBTQ plus, authors?
Well, largely it's what I could describe as the, I guess, part two of a one point part one, part two dream that I needed a vehicle to get my own workout.
Right.
And learning that process showed me that, oh, I know how to do it, so now I know how to help other people do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then God comes along and says, hey, here's a marketable skill, and we're going to develop it. But I have to admit, it's worth noting that the company name came about, me calling myself a publisher came about very far before I felt ready to work with someone else. I just didn't have the
Mm-hmm.
confidence to do it.
Right.
And in that same time, I was finishing my second book, my third book, and even a publishing guide that distills, pretty much everything that I do.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so through that process, I looked up and I was making more connections with a lot of different people, a lot of other writers. And
Right.
I saw, well, hey, yeah, I was able to do this for myself. And I always, if you're familiar with the industry, so I know you know about this, there has been a stigma for a long time about self-publishing
Oh
or
yeah.
going to a self-publishing service.
Right.
And it's always something that I've looked at a little differently, but after my experience of doing this for roughly 12 years, I wear it
Mm-hmm.
with a badge of honor, especially when I'm often even reminded that, hey, you're a one-man show and you got that whole thing done, regardless of what typo might have been there or where you might have skipped a beat in an interview. You're doing it all. You are a publisher. And the most rewarding
Mm-hmm.
thing was to finally go back to a lot of those people I'd known for some time on any number of personal levels and say, hey, for whatever reason, you have an obstacle to getting yourself out there, finally writing something. I decided I wanted to do an anthology of Black authors. And so
Mm-hmm.
I reached out to, people I've known from high school, college, community organizations, churches, Facebook, the whole nine. If I had any memory of us talking about them writing or they had shown me something, I, in a sense, gave them an invitation to be a part of what I've titled From a Black Perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So it's roughly real quick. It's three-part anthology series that features new as well as established authors who all happen to be Black. But it is a mixture of still working on this bit of diversity for the last piece, but it is a mixture of Black women primarily right now, Black
Okay.
gay men. But as of the third volume, we're looking at Black lesbian women, we're looking at Black straight men, and just, expanding it as much as possible. And so this was where I really kind of felt like, in a sense, money is not here and everything is not done yet, but I felt
Right.
like, in a sense, that, oh my God, I finally really wear this title of publisher in a way that for me has checked all the boxes. I published a book. I paid for it. I did everything on the inside of it, outside of it. And through this opportunity, there were some people who are in it who weren't published before, who now have a valuable publishing credit. Not to
Mm-hmm.
mention the idea that we all share the rights to the book and we all have the ability to share the book independently. They paid nothing to me. They paid
Right.
nothing to me later. They sell the book, I sell the book, everything is very straight up and down, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
so I said, wow, okay, I finally really hit this place of, I feel like, okay, yeah, I can wear this title. Publisher, I can go around and wear this title.
Well, let me say this. Let me tell you something. I had to get that out. It makes me feel good when I do that. I I have to commend you, man, because first of all, it is tough to write a book. Just to write, to be an author, to realize your dream of being an author. But then to take it steps further and create a publishing company to publish yourself and other folks as well, it's no small feat. It is totally commendable. And unfortunately, you do have some people who don't understand what it takes to be an author and then also to be a publisher. And you have people who just don't understand your vision, who just don't get it. So therefore, you don't get the support that you would like to have. Let's talk a bit about that. Or
Um,
or
so
maybe that didn't happen in your case.
excellent. So I'm a bit of the eternal optimist for somebody that deals with all that depression. I
Mm-hmm.
ascribe to God. But I'm always drawn to the people who read it that I didn't expect to read it.
Mm-hmm.
The people that buy and support in any number of ways. And I know we all say cash is king, and yeah, money helps things move around. But the more I've honestly been in this business, I do so much bartering that, they trade a skill, I trade a skill. I interview them, they give me a book, whatever.
Right.
And so I guess I'm constantly more so looking at opportunities, and I guess I'm just in a
Mm-hmm.
good place to even focus like that right now. But I just learned that as I just don't do myself and anyone that, may see the company, may come through the company, any service by focusing on who didn't support. And at the same time, I thankfully have the testimonies that I can fall back on where there were people that said at one point they wouldn't buy and then they did. Or there were people that didn't show up to one book event, but from that I even learned, hey, just always throw a good event. Don't worry about how many people are there. Just throw an event that will
Uh-huh.
make everyone feel that that event was so good, I will not miss the next one he does. And
Ah.
so, in that respects, with my
Mm-hmm.
writing, even in the events and everything else related to the company, I'm constantly trying to one up myself and improve the quality incrementally. Learned that over 12 years. But so, thankfully, I guess I'm just too focused on the work. I'm too focused on the work to really let when I see it, to be fair, I don't see it as much as other people can say that they see the ops, so to speak, or, the criticisms or the very public criticism. I just haven't really experienced it or haven't experienced it enough.
Right.
If anything, much like my life, it's very much like my life in general that I spend so much time up in here fighting these battles, conquering these demons daily. I don't, I just don't have the time and the focus, and sometimes even the energy for all the external. I take in enough of it that it fulfills my writing in some kind of way or whatever aspect of my life, but I learn how to sort through the garbage.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's a fantastic mindset, very productive mindset to have, Eddie. Okay. Is there a push for Rainbow Room Publishing to include LGBTQ plus HIV positive characters? And if so, why?
Well, it's definitely so. The company has four primary mission objectives. One of them to improve literacy, supporting the cause for HIV/AIDS awareness and advocacy, helping small businesses, and I'm forgetting one of them. But it's there largely because of my experience. It's there largely because looking at and examining this experience through my writing through
Uh-huh.
promoting the works, I've often learned that some of the people that have the most to say, like of value,
Mm-hmm.
that can get down to the most universal truths of love and loss, tragedy and triumph, are
Right.
those of us that are living on the margins.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the African American, that can talk about police brutality in a way that the white man can't necessarily talk about, or certain white men. That's the way that a black gay man can talk about love in a way that a black straight man can. But you see where I'm going from that very general down to this more specific. And
Mm-hmm.
it challenges me in a lot of respects to find the most universal truths and examples and settings and actions and responses and dialogue when I put that into my story. My aim is being very conscious of the fact that I'm writing from a very specific lens and
Okay.
not necessarily to a very specific target audience. But I
Hmm.
am
Hmm.
trying to
I like that.
make sure that everyone in a sense can find themselves in the story. And it's been, in a lot of respects, coincidental that a lot of the writers that I work with come from the LGBTQ plus community, because of, just the circles I've been in terms of even churches, that I've gone to
Right.
that are predominantly African American and LGBTQ affirming. And so just through those associations, we find out that each other right. I see what they are doing, they see what I'm doing, and we say, hey, we want to do something together in some shape, form, or fashion, be it as a client, be it as, contributing to, the anthology or something to that effect. And we go from there. So it's not so much that it is targeted just at that group, but as someone taught me once upon a time, when you take care of quote unquote the least of these in society, you've served everybody. And the best example is what she told me, which was that think about a ramp versus steps when you're building a building. Anyone on a walker, anyone on in a wheelchair, anyone on roller skates or a bike can go up a ramp, but only of those of us
Hmm.
with a certain mobility can go up steps. So
True. True.
if you opt for the ramp over the steps, you've served everybody. And that's the way
Hmm.
that I, in a lot of respects, model the company, model the philosophy, decide who I want to work with and who I probably maybe need to circle back to later, kind of thing. Who helps me serve the most people? What helps the company serve the most writers, the most artists?
Man, that is powerful and deep. I like the whole particular lens versus target audience. That's that gives us a lot to think about. Hmm. Okay. Okay, Eddie. What advice, what counsel do you have for aspiring authors and even already published authors, particularly on the marketing and promotion fronts?
Oh, um, be imaginative.
Mm-hmm.
Especially one of the things I learned, for anyone that's familiar with Issa Rae, known for the series Insecure on Facebook,
Mm-hmm.
HBO.
Right.
One of the things she said that was most impactful in an interview that me and several of my friends saw together will never forget was that she talked about this beauty that comes out of necessity and how she described where very early on in her web series producing for Awkward Black Girl, which later became Insecure,
Right.
there was a place where she didn't have any lighting. And just somewhere in a moment's notice, she looked over at a lamp, took the lampshade off. Boom, there was her lighting. And she didn't, she was able to look at this thing that seemed momentarily, at least, this insurmountable obstacle that's going to stop the whole production. And
Right.
right there, what she needed was at hand. She goes further on to talk about the idea that we should network across versus up. We're spending a lot of time and not necessarily in the most fruitful ways trying to reach Oprah and whatever, those in the stratosphere, when there are people in our circle, much like our interview came about, are
Mm-hmm.
right there along with us. To some degree, we are moving in tandem because we have some very similar aims, despite how specific the lens.
Right.
We're in a larger respect serving art. Let's put it out that way. We're serving art. We're serving art to the people. We're serving the cause of art. And so be imaginative, be mindful of what you have at hand, and consider all of your resources. This last thing. Someone once told me that at any point in time, you always have one of three resources: time, talent, or money. There have been instances in my career, in my life in general, where I did not have money, but I had time and talent, and I was still
Mm.
able to accomplish or acquire, fill in the noun, what have you.
Exactly.
And so from that perspective, I've been able to produce more. Altogether, where I have to get the most creative is where I can honestly say, and I think about, for gays of a certain age, I think about the, not necessarily, I guess, the inception, but the height of the ballroom age, and how we went up for the girls, especially for those who are familiar with pose, we went up for the girls who were in their apartment sewing the hell out of that dress. I hope that word was acceptable.
It
Versus the
is.
girls who we kind of laughed with, who were quote unquote mobbing and robbing the stores for designer brand names and then wearing that on the runway. Um, there was something that was more unique with their hands in it, but it was also born out of necessity. I don't have money to go buy these clothes, so I'm gonna make something fierce. And by the way, it's gonna look better than anything you're gonna pull off the rack.
That's right.
So be mindful of at all times, you have time, you have talent, you have money in some cases. Consider all of those whenever you consider any project, whenever you see yourself coming up against any obstacle. Before you say, oh, I can't write this book. Oh, I can't start this company. Oh, I can't start this podcast.
Dang, this is inspirational. Dang, this is it. Dang. Mr. Pierce Jr., this is inspirational. I'm serious. What you say, what you just said makes so much common sense.
And it's the
Yeah.
simplest things that often elude us, right?
Yes,
I mean, especially
absolutely.
with this writing thing, and I'm sorry I cut you off.
No,
With
no,
this
go ahead.
writing thing, I'm seeing so many memes and sharing them lately, even that the secret to writing is just to write. The only way to learn to write is to write. And everything comes back to just write the book. In the midst of my promotions recently of different things, I had cause to look back at the 10th anniversary of my second book, and I love having the visual aids. But with that, there was, some finance that I was able to do a lot of things with, but it turned into a casino themed party because the book takes place in
Oh,
Vegas. Real dealers, real gaming
I like
equipment, the whole
that.
thing. The only thing that wasn't real was not gambling. But
Whoa.
I was telling someone when I sent them the post of a video where I just took all of the pictures and I said, the seed was a book.
Mhm.
The seed was a book. None of that happens until this is done. This doesn't happen until this is done. And I guess because we sometimes I can relate to being that person that will look at a process, look at a goal, and see the big picture, but in a negative way, in a sense where I'll get overwhelmed by all of the things that
Mhm.
need to be done to accomplish this goal.
Right,
And that's
right.
why even in the publishing guide that I mentioned, very first thing that you read before you read anything that I tell you about how I did the publishing was, have you written the book? If you haven't written a book, you probably don't want to look at this yet because I've seen from my own experience and I've had marginal success, but I could imagine that much more where if I was writing that I wasn't constantly thinking about who's going to read it, who's going to buy it, where I'm going to try to sell it, when am I going to try to release it, how many pages does it need to be, what font will we put it in, how would a cover look? Put the story, and I'm trying not to use any FCC banned language,
That's
on the
okay.
page. I have to tell myself that. I have to get that gritty in the mirror with myself on occasion. Eddie, you've done this too many times. You have too many copies of this book around this house for you not to see your own testimony of you wrote the book, then you typed the book, then you made the book, then you did the event, and then you moved on to the next book. Go sit down and write.
It's so much, when I do workshops and when I do book readings, people will ask me, how do I start? How do I start? You got to start by writing the book. I mean, it takes discipline. First of all, it takes belief in yourself that you have something that people need to hear and read about.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've got to have the faith in yourself that you can do that. And then you got to have the discipline to write, to put aside time to actually write, that you might have to forego the football game. Those guys are already paid. You're not paid. So, oh man, what you're saying is absolutely correct.
And I mean, and if I can add, the first book, and just looking down at them, a couple of them were easier to write than others because it was purely a thing of I was writing just to write, no concept, thought, plan of sharing anything with anyone.
Right.
Those were the easiest things to deal with. Now you're dealing with a series, you're writing, you're kind of in some respects pulling in the feedback, shuffling how much of what you want out of what the readers have said about the first book, what they hope for in the second, whatever, and all of that becomes the second book. But there was just that much more mental minutia in a sense to sift through while trying to get the words on the page.
Right.
And it all always reminds me of a couple things I learned from, actually, even this was in my undergrad at Truman State University in Missouri, but when I was working on my BA in English. And they talked about the idea that it was very much Neo in the Matrix, you know, how they go into the whole there is no spoon.
Right.
Someone somewhere in along the way said that ultimately there's no such thing as writer's block.
Hmm.
Writer's block, when we kind of talked about it and reasoned together in a sense,
Mm-hmm.
and we were like, well, you know, the problem with writer's block and with writing in a lot of people's respects is that we want to get it out perfect the first time around.
Mm.
And so we
Okay.
stop. And even as I'm writing, you know, even somewhat continuously, occasionally, whatever, I find myself editing in my head. But then
Right.
sometimes I do almost get what I want out. But if not, I'm always like, well, hell, I can always revise it. Hell, even in
Mm-hmm.
these books, I look up and I say, these been out for 10 years. If I still find something I don't like, edition number 4, you know, we'll edit it to keep it moving.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, through that whole experience, I, ah, how do I put it in trying to wrap it? Just writing in the sense of putting stuff on the page. We're always so scared about it being perfect,
Mm-hmm.
but it's impossible to revise a blank page. If there's nothing on the
Yes.
page, there's nothing you can
Yeah.
fix, add, you know, but at the same time, look at it on the positive and look on the flip. Now I have something from which to work.
Please say that again to our aspiring authors out there about the blank page. Say that again, please.
You cannot, and I can't remember who made the quote, but you cannot edit a blank page. You cannot revise or edit a blank page.
And another thing, too, is I think if you take the process in chunks, because if you dwell on the entirety of it too much and too long, it'll become overwhelming. But if you say to yourself, this is going to be a process, a months long process, and I have to take it in chunks, that will be, you'll be able to handle the situation, the process better, if
Yeah.
that makes sense. Just
Yeah,
chunk.
yeah. And that
Yeah.
even I think I like what you said, that speaks to, you know, even the idea of discipline. And listening to a number of people I've worked with, reading other memes and things, you know, there's this conversation about I guess motivation versus discipline. Like those
Mm.
moments where you just had this epiphany. You watched a great episode. This used to happen to me all the time. You watch a great episode of Scandal or something Shonda Rhimes did, and the
Right.
episode goes off, and as a writer I say to myself, oh, I'm supposed to be writing, go do something. But then you have those other moments where I haven't looked at this in a year, 2 years, 3 years. Are you still a writer? Are you sure? You just need to just go make it happen, just like you go wash the dishes, just like you go to the
Mm.
club, like you just go to the workout club. You have to be intentional. And then sometimes, as one of them also spoke to, sometimes the epiphanies, sometimes those grand moments of motivation come out of the discipline. You look back, even if you struggle to write a page versus a sentence versus a paragraph versus a chapter, you can look back and say, oh, I did, I accomplished something, and
Right.
you build on that. And just
Right.
even know that some days it's gonna be you accomplish writing a sentence, and there are some days, you know, where you may write a whole book. If I don't know, I've heard of people that have done stuff like that where they just kind of sat still for a whole day. I haven't experienced that, and in a sense finished a manuscript. But just saying that, be mindful that your best is not going to be the same every day.
Yes.
when it comes to writing. And even,
Right.
don't we have to be disciplined, at least for me. I have to have discipline, certain boundaries, certain schedules, but I'm the person, and it may be a Scorpio trait. Um, I swing from extremes a bit too much for my own liking. I can be very regimented or very fancy, footloose and free. And in
Mm.
my effort to get from here to here, I tend to always overcorrect and end up way over here. And so there's this constant, checking of that, gauging of that, and trying to get to this sweet spot of I'm going to write consistently, but what does consistently look like? Does that mean 5 times a week this week when I also know I might have to work 24 hours a day, one of those days? My best is not always going to be the same, but be faithful, be disciplined, and that's different than being perfect. I guess is the best way for me to wrap that up.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just like you're not going to always feel the same every day, you
Right.
know?
Even about what you write. I've had that experience on several occasions. I almost trashed the second book altogether after having like 120 some odd pages into it. And sometimes that process of writing, we see all these graphs. I'm sure you see them where they love to show these pie charts of how much time the writer is actually writing versus all this other stuff. And the sliver of the pie is always super tiny when it comes to the actual writing. Everything else is the living that in some way hopefully feeds into the writing. And so, yeah, being mindful that there are times too where you got to step away from it,
Yeah.
be it a day, be it a month, maybe a year, because life does be lifing.
Well, Eddie, where do you see Rainbow Room Publishing in like 5 years? I know it's a cliched question, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
I've heard that some of the best cliches are born out of nuggets of truth. And in my opinion, that's also an important question, especially as a business person, and I think as a person in general. We should always have some portion of our focus on the future. It gives us the motivation to do what we got to do today. But when it comes to the company, 5 years, 5 years, 5 years. So coincidentally, this November the 12th, 2023 will be the 12th anniversary of the company and the first book. And so I already got some benchmarks, because of that in mind. But, thinking about that, I see where the other two arms of the company will be up and existing and more noticed and that sort of thing. The second being Rainbow Room Publishing Live, which the podcast I'm starting, or have started building it now. But and then Kaleidoscope, a online digital but also print on demand art magazine
Mm-hmm.
that will really allow me to get into like all these other things I like in that umbrella of art that aren't necessarily writing. And that turns into features and interviews and ideally marketing pieces in a sense for those different independent, quote unquote, independent artists, out there, be it music, be it hairdressers, nail
Yeah.
technicians, tattoo artists, cosplay actors. I love comic books, so I definitely love cosplay. So I'm really there trying to expand people's definition of art. And so within five
Mm-hmm.
years, ideally, I see those two, in addition to Rainbow Room Publishing, being in a place of definitely financial stability. And because of
Mm-hmm.
Jesus, I say in abundance. And just honestly kind of tripping over daily in a way of gratitude of how many people I've been able to impact, be it the artists that I've helped in some way by investing in their career, or, the consumer, who gains whatever inspiration, education, or entertainment, my main three goals, from that which I produce or help to promote.
Well, I want to be on your podcast too.
Done. One hand
But
washes the other, and iron sharpens iron.
thank you, sir. I appreciate that. So, look, how can we follow you, connect with you? Give us all of your social media.
Well, everything is pretty much centralized, and I try to keep on top of it at the website www.rainbowroompublishing.com. But using the company name, Rainbow Room Publishing, or my name, Eddie Pierce or Eddie S. Pierce, all the socials pretty much. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, still kind of messing around with Twitter, the YouTubes. um, um, Trying to get to where all of the kids are, so to speak, for the most part, with the exception where I draw some
Mhm.
lines with stuff like Snapchat. I just not gonna get into Snapchat, but hey, TikTok, I'm there. I did it. I finally got there.
Got it. Well, Mr. Eddie S. Pierce Jr. of Rainbow Room Publishing, thank you for dropping by. Wyatt, you must come back.
Thank you. I look forward to it, and I hope to send a number of great artists your way.
You got it, my brother. Listen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, y'all, there you have it. You can find the official Wyatt podcast page at WyattEvans.com, the go-to destination for LGBTQ plus news, features, commentary, and entertainment. WyattEvans.com is visited by more than 100 countries on the regular. All I can say to that is, hey, baby. And at WyattEvans.com, you'll find my smoking hot, HAWT hot, Nothing Can Tear Us Apart series of novels. And as you just saw on the top, the newest installment is called Shattered. I said Shattered. And y'all, Shattered is full of action, danger, intrigue, sexually charged situations, passion, and all of the wonderful elements that you're used to in the Nothing Can Tear Us Apart series of novels. So get your new copy of Shattered. Now, you can follow me, your host, Wyatt O'Brien Evans, all across social media, and poof, is right there for you to peruse, like TikTok and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. And if you have any comments or whatever, you can hit me up at wyattonair@gmail.com. So until next time, y'all, woof, goddammit, woof, 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 woof. I said woof.